Hi, this is a recap of the first episode of Tales of the Walking Dead. Several years have passed since the beginning of the apocalypse. The world is overrun by the Walking Dead, and anyone who dies or gets bitten joins their ranks. While some survivors live in communities and fight against others, Joe has settled into his bunker and has been living there for several years with his old friend. Joe watches baseball, works out every day, and takes his dog for walks. However, he has never ventured beyond his territory because he was better prepared for the apocalypse than anyone else. His days are like Groundhog Day, but Joe is perfectly fine with that. He enjoys every single one. One day, his dog, Jilly, pees on the bed. Old age is taking its toll. Joe takes Jilly outside to relieve himself, but it's nighttime and unfortunately some walkers are nearby. They surround the shelter and Gilly attacks one of them to protect his owner. The dog doesn't survive. The next morning, Joe buries his friend, and his days become much gloomier than before. He no longer finds joy in this life, and his longing for Gilly grows stronger every day. One day, he finds a printed copy of his old conversations with a woman who, like him, built a bunker and had already been living in it before the zombie apocalypse. They used to exchange messages and enjoyed talking to each other since no one else truly understood them. But in real life, they never met. Joe was too afraid to go. Now, with nothing holding him back and loneliness slowly killing him, he decides to go find his beloved, using the coordinates she left behind. He's convinced she's still alive and waiting for him. Joe gears up and sets off on his motorcycle. The sight of destruction doesn't scare him. Instead, it fuels his motivation to keep going. But on his very first night, he falls into an ambush and loses his transport. He heads to the nearest building, but ends up trapped. A stranger tells him she won't kill him as long as he doesn't cause trouble. She takes him inside and ties him up. The girl says she'll take his motorcycle in exchange for shelter. But Joe refuses, claiming that his bike has a security system. So instead, she forces him to be her driver. He must take her to her destination, and then they'll part ways. The next morning, she puts handcuffs on Joe, and they prepare to set out. She notices a picture of his dog and reveals that she also loves Dobermans. On the road, Joe decides to annoy her with his singing. Oh, cool singing. After all, the only thing he can do now is get on her nerves. That night, Joe tries to prove to the stranger that she can trust him, but she wants to be sure. She takes his bag and starts looking through his things, which greatly annoys Joe. When she reaches his notebook, he firmly tells her to stay out of his personal belongings, but the girl suspects there might be something important inside. Maybe information about a gang or some other danger. Instead, she finds heartfelt diary entries addressed to his beloved. Joe is upset and goes to sleep, while the stranger, seeing his state, covers him with a blanket. The next day, after spending the entire day on the road, they watched a beautiful sunset. The girl said that even in this world, there were still beautiful things left, and Joe completely agreed with her. That night, they were attacked by several walkers, but they successfully fought them off. After this, the girl realized that Joe could be trusted and removed his handcuffs. The next day, Evie took the wheel, and they had a great time on the road, listening to music. That night, they decided to stop at a warehouse. Sipping beer, they talked about everything. At that moment, the girl finally introduced herself. Her name was Evie. She shared that she was a vegan and that she once had a husband. Maybe he loved her, but she was never completely sure. She didn't know if she should keep searching for him. Joe also opened up about his feelings for the woman he was heading to find. He asked Evie to help him locate the bunker since it was on their way. She agreed, and gradually a genuine friendship began to form between them. But in the morning, their plans fell apart. A stranger stole their motorcycle, leaving a sheep as a thank you. Without hesitation, Joe grabbed Evie's gun and ran after the thief. However, the weapon turned out to be unloaded, which wasn't surprising, given Evie's views. She, on the other hand, had no intention of abandoning the poor animal and now protected it as if it were her last friend. They had no choice but to continue on foot. Realizing that all his plans were ruined, Joe started blaming Evie for everything, including her worldview. He claimed that he should have left her a long time ago, but she wouldn't let him push her away so easily. Evie reminded him that he could have left at any moment, but he didn't, because he was lonely. Unlike him, she didn't break down after every setback and managed to stay human despite all the chaos around them. Angry, Joe left on his own, but soon he realized that his beloved's bunker was very close. It even seemed like a sign. Cameras were set up outside, and he called out asking to be let in. The woman who opened the door was exactly the one he had been searching for. Her name was Sandra. She was thrilled to finally see her longtime pen pal. Joe was stunned by her appearance. He had never imagined how beautiful she was. Even after a workout with slightly messy hair and sweat on her skin, she looked stunning. Meanwhile, Evie found her husband's workshop. There she discovered a portrait of herself, and at that moment she realized that he truly had loved her. Sandra led Joe to the kitchen, played some soft music, and offered him a chocolate pastry. She admitted that she had never expected him to actually find her. Then she left briefly to freshen up. Left alone, Joe suddenly felt something was wrong. His mind started to blur. The pastry was poisoned. When Sandra returned, she no longer looked like the kind woman who had just welcomed him with a smile. Now she stood before him as a true deranged killer. She stabbed him and furiously asked why he had come. Madness burned in her eyes. She was convinced that Joe, like everyone else, wanted to take over her bunker. Joe tried to convince her otherwise, but she refused to believe him. Sandra revealed that many people had tried to take her shelter from her. Once, a man actually attempted it, and she killed him. Since then, she had trusted no one. She murdered every man who came to her and took their watches as trophies. Over time, it had become her twisted habit. Now, she was going to kill Joe too, but he was saved by the amulet that Evie had once given him. Despite being poisoned, Joe gathered his last strength and attacked her. At that moment, the alarm system went off. It meant that Evie had found the bunker. Sandra tied Joe up and stepped outside to greet her new guest. Wiping off her makeup, she put on a friendly demeanor and invited Evie inside, claiming that Joe was already there. Offering her a pastry, Sandra hoped to repeat her trick, but Evie noticed a strange smell and refused. She immediately sensed that something was off. When Sandra attacked, Evie managed to dodge. She rushed to free Joe. Despite his weakness, Joe grabbed a cleaver and, mustering in all his remaining strength, struck. The deranged killer was finally stopped. Escaping from the bunker, they saw that Sandra had already turned. She was now a walker. Without hesitation, Joe and Evie slammed the hatch shut and locked it. Joe was grateful that Evie had come for him. Now they were together again. The next morning, Evie woke up alone. For a moment, fear gripped her. Maybe Joe had decided to leave after all, but soon she spotted him nearby. He was simply dealing with the undead. Realizing that he hadn't abandoned her, Evie felt relieved. She knew their story wasn't over yet. There were still beautiful places left in this world worth seeing, and now they could go there together. Joe agreed. They set off toward their fate. That's the end of the episode. Share your thoughts on this mini-series. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new exciting videos.